Welcome, people of the World Wide Web. So it is Cypher Sigma here. It is the weekend and a kind of a little discussion for this day, and the next day hopefully there should be a cinema review. So this is a video, and as the title would say, it's the scope. This is kind of something I've come up with. I'm sure the idea is not new. I've not magically plucked this out of thin air. Whether it is called this and people consider this is the whole point of this discussion, and this all comes from kind of a review thing. So this follows on from Captain America 4 that was out in February, so a few months ago, and I'll put the poster up. So there was a kind of review, and it was seen as like the fourth worst Marvel movie, for one reason or another. Obviously, if you've watched the channel, seen my review, I didn't necessarily agree it's the fourth worst one, but that is it. But this is where there is something very, I think, closed-minded, and this is what it kind of says the scope. So the kind of the idea of this scope is essentially it is how you view something, and so kind of the usefulness, or kind of the, if you wanted to kind of loosely put it into brackets, it's like, so say if there was four people, or say four trees in your back garden, you will look at them and go, no, this tree is really, really lovely, this, you know, and that tree is really, really ugly. Like, yes, that is it, you know, from those four trees, that is what you're looking at. But when you take those trees out of your garden and then put them in a forest, it is a completely and utterly different ball game. And this is where I know it seems a bit of a strange analogy, but essentially what we have a tendency to do in this day and age, because of like how movies have progressed, how us have progressed as audience members, you know, we come from, or a lot of people my age, around my age, older and younger, come from a very popular era of movies, like late 70s, 80s, 90s, massive movies, all these movies we grew up with, so we have these personal connections with, you know, we all relate to them much. We could sit there and, you know, sit on our phone and watch half the movie and still know roughly what's going on and still say we enjoyed the movie, because, you know, in our database of movie and knowledge stuff, it sits there quite early on, and we attach to this, and this is how humans do, they do attach to stuff. The problem is that when you start getting such a big encyclopedia of movies and stuff, you very much are more selective of necessarily what you want to watch. Sometimes I'm not necessarily like that, but I'm saying generally this is what people like. And the thing is, when you compare stuff to it, and this is where whole the scope is of where you look at stuff and why I mention it and say, and the thing is that Captain America came out of February, as I said, 2025. Now, according to IMDb, I think there's about 538 movies released. So we'll say 500 just to make it round up. Now, when they compare it to like the Eternals, I can't remember what the other two ones now. I should know on the poster. But yeah, I'll use the Eternals, and that was a few years ago. So if you take that there are 500 movies a year and have been in it for like the past 20, 30 years, you know, there have been like 2,000 movies in between the Eternals and Captain America 4. So why in hell are we comparing them? All because they're superheroes, they're different superheroes. They have no, apart from being in the same world, why are we comparing it to it? And this is, I think, I wouldn't necessarily say a problem, but this is the thing that audience have, that they get too narrow-minded. It is the same kind of concept of someone that goes, well, I only want to watch movies that are 7 or a plus on IMDb. You know, you restrict yourself too much to this scope, to this spectrum of movies, and then what is essentially, you know, like these really, really good movies that you have, you then kind of have this as the default, and that's what you expect. You know, these movies that you've grown up with and have built these memories and have good memories with them that you're never going to get from newer movies, but this is what you then compare them to, for one reason or another. And I'm not going to get into the where's, what's and whys necessarily of why people feel like that, but this is what I think, you know, with attention spans and stuff, of how kids are and stuff like this, and us comparing them to movies of other franchises. Because, you know, the MCU is the first of its world. Yes, we do have DC and we have a few other franchises that have gone quite along. But in Marvel, you know, you're 30 odd movies, you're like 12 odd series, you know, it is its own entity within itself. And I think us keep having to be, keep having to compare it like for like, if you basically took the fact it was a Marvel movie away from that movie and compared it to probably every movie that's going to be released this year, I can tell you for a fact it is by nowhere near the bottom of the list. And I say we are in April. I've seen enough movies this year to tell you it is not the worst movie. It's not even near the worst movie. Um, I know Snow White's going to be in there. Definitely Snow White was a far worse movie than this. And that rates what it is. But the thing is, as I say, comparing it against, and this is where the scope of things come up, people get too, I think, a little narrow-minded, and this is why I'm saying the scope of, they look at it and go, oh, this Marvel movie is not as good as this Marvel movie. Yet, regardless of that, take the Marvel movies out of the way. How is it in comparison to every movie that is being produced at this time? Because audience, the movies of this time are being tailored to the audience of this time. People don't, there are streaming movies. Obviously, that is where the money kind of is, streaming stuff. That's why movies don't have as many releases at the cinema because of this transition. So, of course, they're going to change the strategy of how they make movies and stuff. People don't go to the cinema. People sit and put a 2-hour streaming movie on that they may half pay attention to and go, no, that wasn't very good. According to the analytics of making money, that's what they see. And this is where I think people get too distracted and I say too much in the scope of, well, this is Marvel movie and we'll compare it against all the other movies. Yes, you can kind of do that, but then you need to take a step back and need to understand the movie for what it is. Having it too much of a comparison to saying red is like pink. Yes, there is some comparisons there because obviously you add white and then you get pink, but it could also be like purple and other stuff like this. You need to kind of be a little bit open-minded. I think the more narrow-minded people get and the more the scope is shrinking on this, specifically, as I say, people who have been around 20, 30, 40 years watching movies, and have these movies that they love because they've grown up, if you go back in time and watch a lot of these older movies stuff, you could probably easily pick them apart from a different mindset, from a different concept, from a different age of movie viewers. But people seem to kind of gloss over this now. And, that is where kind of, as I say, I know I'm not speaking to it, but the scope is what I definitely look at. I went in and I enjoyed the movie. I can compare the Captain America movie to the rest of the Marvel movies, but I did step back and went, well, compared to everything else I've watched for the past few years, actually, it isn't too bad. The problem with it, more or less, is essentially they revealed the Hulk in the trailer, which they shouldn't have done. And in all fairness, it was bad casting from Harrison Ford. In my eyes, and from what I see of a lot of reviews, they are the two major points. So the scope is, and this is where I do find people's attitudes just in general, when I go see, I have a lot of friends and I've gone to see to my cinemas with my friends, and there are some people that don't go to the cinema often that then will watch movies with me and that I think aren't that great, and they will enjoy like Borderlands and stuff like this. Because their range is so open because they don't watch the extent of movies that I have, and people who do that sometimes, as I say, get their view and their point is a little narrow, to say constricted, and that's the scope that they play of. And I mean, as I say, unfortunately, movies do change of times. I'm not saying that there ain't rubbish movies out there. I'm not saying there's a lot of other factors out there, but essentially what it comes down to is, I think, we have to be a bit more open-minded and not closed-minded of the experiences we've had and changing of the times. Because at the end of the day, from probably what was 100 movies in the 90s, we get, as I say, 500, or you get so much more content out there, so much more stuff. Now, of course, it's not all going to be great. I mean, even if they produced 90% of the movies were amazing movies, and they all sat in this, you went, oh, these are all amazing movies, and you only have this little bit that are in the crap movies, but all these amazing movies wouldn't be amazing movies because then we'd have the scope of them, and then we'd start digging them out. And the movies that were really, really good, but you know, over time we got a bit bored of, then they would go to like the average movies and stuff, and it'd have to be, you know, you'd have to really up the game. And there's just these little bits, as I say, like, and these comes from like conversations I've had with friends in the past, and I use that IMDb from the guy, you know, and the guy's a really loved guy I played football with, but he was always like, I only watch movies if they're 7.0 or above on IMDb, and I'm like, you're missing out on so many good movies, you know. And I say, in this day and age, we have to be a little bit more, I feel, proactive on some of this, because obviously back in the day, you had movies in the 80s and 90s that were not financially successful, that become cult hits. Unfortunately, the way we're going, and we're not going to the cinema and streaming and stuff like that, if we don't support the movie industry in whichever way we can, we will end up just sitting at home, and it will just be 100% streaming, and all the rubbish movies that people don't like, that is what you will be stuck with. And then you will go, well, I really wish I had half of the physical media. Or you'll pick up and you'll only watch old movies, and the whole movie thing will just die a very slow death. And I don't want that. I feel that, and the next generation should be, you know, there are a lot of inspirational and ingenious people out there with clever ideas that can be used within cinema. I don't think, even though it seems like everything has been used up, I think there are clever ideas. I've watched movies in the past few years that are fairly new concepts. They sometimes do derive from older stuff. And I think we have that potential and have to encourage it at the end of the day. As I say, and just like taking off the binoculars and going, oh, actually, this is what everything looks like. Let me, you know, being a bit more focused on stuff as well. I think that very much will help the whole situation. As I say, this is just my thought and my focus and just what I notice from people around me. Obviously, this is my personal opinion. You don't have to take it, but as I've rightly said, and I will, you know, in 5-10 years, if we are sitting there, cinemas are all closed, we sit on streaming, and basically 99.9% movies are streaming, most people just have themselves to blame, because that's, you know, when we have too much attachment and too much older stuff. I mean, as I say, my favorite movie is The Crow. I love it to death. I can praise it to death, but I could also probably sit down and rip the thing to shreds if I want to, and I can understand why people don't like it, and I don't force that opinion on them. That is down to them. I do, though, feel you need to open up people's worldview to have the conversation. You know, something I've learned from my boss, from my work and stuff like I do, that there are always other opinions to something you are talking about, and you need to be open and understanding of that other opinion, whether it's right, whether it's wrong. These other opinions normally lead you to some point in the future them actually being useful. And if you close yourself off, like limiting the scope, then obviously this is where we get into, you just want movies that are like Jurassic Park and, you know, like Titanic and Back to the Future and all this stuff. And that's what you want. And if it isn't what you want, it's rubbish. And we need to kind of get a little bit out of that. As I say, and with like the whole supporting movies and cult stuff, you know, if you take precedent and if you look, the Shawshank Redemption was a financial failure at the movie. It didn't even make back its budget on its original viewing. You know, now that movie is a massively, massively great movie. It is enjoyable. It is a long movie. It is detailed. It comes from a book. And it's only earned the money it has is by being rewatched over time. And even the amount of money it has accumulated at the cinema isn't massive. And you think of, but obviously that was like the 90s, and you know, this is 30 years time. You know, we were able to support this. If we don't do the support for newer movies, then in 2050 they won't be around. There won't be stuff to support, and as I say, it will just be people's attention spans on phones and everything else. It will just probably be TV series that when you then flood with well, I know there's like over 500 TV series produced a year worldwide as well. So there's so much content, but I said it'll just be diluted and rubbish. But anyway, that has been my little discussion on the scope of movies, movie watching, and the whole feel of the movie industry as a whole. Do you agree, disagree in my opinions? Please do put them down. You know, I'd love to hear people's views and what they interpret from that. Do you think I'm wrong? Do you think being narrow-minded and only concentrating on something is right? I'm happy to have that discussion and listen to people's point of views. Otherwise, please like, comment, subscribe, and do all the things you want to do in a video. Otherwise, I shall see you in the next one.